Hi, Allie. Thank you so much for coming on the Thrival Nutrition Podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing awesome. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm excited for an awesome conversation.
Yes, yes, and it's about your new book, and I'm so
Yes,
excited about it. I've been reading it every night, and I love it so far. The
good,
picky in me
good.
definitely loves it, and it's all about anti-anxiety, which is awesome because I'm sure you know. I know there's so many people that struggle with it.
Yeah.
Even I've had bouts of it, in different seasons of life. So we'll start off with stress. So what are well, actually first, let's introduce you first before
Sure.
we started. So tell us about yourself.
Sure. So my name's Allie Miller, and I am a registered dietitian. And a little bit what's unique about my background is that I went to a naturopathic college of medicine, Bastyr University. And I practice what's called functional integrative medicine. So I have kind of one leg on the bank of the river of naturopathic background, and then I have another leg on the bank of the river of more allopathic. I'm a certified diabetes educator, so I work with specialists like endocrinologists and physicians, and then of course also other specialists like GI docs and whatnot. So I kind of have a little bit of swing where science meets nature, and I try to pull those two together, working with each patient as a unique individual, always working as a detective to determine what is their root causes of imbalance within their body and resolving the whys versus just looking at what's being expressed. And so in my 10 years of clinical practice, I have found that whether I'm treating leaky gut or adrenal fatigue or looking at autoimmune disease or chronic fatigue syndrome, or you name it, hair loss, insomnia, whatnot, that often the crux of this Achilles heel is anxiety. And whether we call it anxiety by diagnosis, or we feel we have a mental health condition, or we're just not managing stress, and we have imbalance within that HPA axis, that can be this like Achilles heel in the body. So you can heal your gut, but if you're not managing your stress, you're just going to find yourself with leaky gut again down the road in this perpetual cycle.
Yes, yes. It does take a whole body approach, and I'm thankful for practitioners like you and doing that because there's not a lot of us out there doing that. Unfortunately, I mean, comparing to the numbers, how many doctors are out there, how many nutritionists and
Right.
dietitians are out there, there's still not that many that actually look at the whole body. Because yeah, we can do the yoga all we want, we can eat all the salads we want, but if we're
Yes.
not handling stress, it's not for nothing. I don't want to say it's for nothing, but we definitely will never get to optimal health.
We're running up a downhill escalator. It's like doing all the work, but we're not going to get that synergistic outcome for certain. And it is fun. I had just last Friday in clinic, 4 of my 6 patients were physicians. So I'm starting to work with a lot of
Yes.
doctors because, as we know, the medical field really tends to kind of slam their bodies and minds and uh, often be an external care provider, even with different methodology and whatnot. And we end up all running like chickens with our heads cut off and need that regrounding and resetting.
Yes, yes. And I'm sure you understand with running a business. I understand with running a business. I was actually going to school to be a PA. So when I was at UCF and I was doing all my prereqs for it, and that's kind of what turned me off because I was pregnant with my daughter, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to like have, that job and just be super stressed and not be able to see my kids and whatever. But I mean, it's kind of the same because now I run a business. I guess I didn't look at on that. So going back to stress, let's start off with how stress is causing imbalances in the body.
Sure. So in my book, I use, with the anti-anxiety diet, I use a 6R approach of different drivers of stress, but also different components that, or anxiety, different drivers of anxiety or stress, but also different components that when unmanaged perpetuate. So it's kind of like this ongoing chicken and egg relationship. So when we think of stress in the first sense, when I'm interviewing a new patient, I spend about 15 minutes talking about stress, and the intake forms that I use say like, rate your stress, low, medium, high, what are your coping mechanisms, and what are common symptoms of stress. And most people are very non-remarkable with the way they fill out that form. They'll say like low to moderate, prayer, walking, yoga, and then, I don't know. And then as I'm talking to them in clinic and I'm like, well, do you grind your teeth? Oh yeah, my dentist said that I have to wear a night guard because I'm totally grinding my teeth. Okay. Do you notice changes in body temperature, like cold and clammy or hot and moist or flashing? Oh yeah, totally. Do you notice tightness in the chest or shortness of breath at times? And it's like when I go through the physiological influences, which we think of as palpitations or arrhythmia, tightness in the chest, changes in body temperature, racing thoughts, difficulty concentrating, rumination, overthinking about what was, or anticipatory mom listing of the what could be or the what ifs in the brain, the anticipatory stress. Many of us then fall into, when we tie that all together, some level of an impact and of imbalanced HPA access. And so my book kind of takes this big picture approach of the systems of the body that are influenced by that.
I love that you brought that up because it's so true. And people are like, either I'm eating healthy, or they say like they forget they have these symptoms, or they don't forget, but it becomes normal. So they just don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah.
So when they're like, oh wait, I guess I do get constipated. I'm like, oh,
yes.
like,
Right. Or my digestion's normal. And then you're like, tell me about your bowels. And you talk about formation and frequency. And they're like, oh, every 2 to 3 days. That's my normal. It's like, that is your normal now, but that is not optimal. There's a difference there. And I think all too often we accept things like, this is aging, this is what it is like to be a mom, this is what it's like to be a working father, fill in the blank. And our society, unfortunately, puts so much focus on the ability of multitasking and taking on everything and wearing many hats versus honoring the need for slowing down and self-care and waving the white flag when we're feeling like we're running on empty.
Yeah, for sure. And so where are the common treatments with anxiety and depression? Where are they going wrong? Because I know they're not looking at the whole body.
Right. So, so I end my approach with looking at rebalancing neurotransmitters, and most of the common allopathic approach with it, whether it's a psychiatrist or just a general practitioner, they're going to often start with an SSRI as the first intervention. And all too often without even doing any counseling, and definitely without doing assessments on neurotransmitters or nutrients that contribute towards neurotransmitters. So when we're prescribing SSRIs, the consideration is, well, first up, the way that those function. So those are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And now there's the new classification of drugs, SSRNIs, which are selective serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. So the SSRIs work just on serotonin receptor sites, and the SSRNIs, like Effexor, work on both serotonin and norepinephrine. And that's this new mentality that maybe, because norepinephrine made by the adrenal glands, maybe the adrenals and that adrenaline has a role in depression and anxiety as well, which is exciting to honor and acknowledge. But the way that these drugs work is they just work on feedback mechanisms, and they block the fact when the brain fires enough serotonin to the receptors that it's received. So instead of getting that negative feedback, there's this perpetual kind of ding-donging effect in the brain. The issue is we can see selective serotonin mania, where we get excessive serotonin syndrome because maybe that individual is already making enough serotonin. We're not looking at why they may not be manufacturing enough, and if it's even a serotonin or norepinephrine issue to begin with. It may be more dopamine related, which actually, Wellbutrin and some drugs do work on dopamine as well. It may be more GABA, and there aren't many drugs other than gabapentin, which is used more in Parkinson's disease and other conditions. There are so many neurotransmitters is really the simple answer. And the problem is a lot of practitioners are just throwing the sexiest drug on the market at the client because they saw a good commercial on it or they got a good white paper on it, rather than looking at what is imbalanced and what that individual needs and how to replete a deficiency versus just working with that feedback mechanism. That's more downstream, and I really like to work upstream.
Right. You always have to ask why and keep why until you get there. And it's unfortunate because so many people, that's just what they know to go to. It's even people that like, just, I gotta see my doctor. I probably need an SSRI. Like that's just what the normal is. And that's
right.
Crazy. So where do you know when to start with addressing anxiety? And where
So
does that functional medicine fit in?
yeah, so my 6R approach includes the first R is removing or reducing inflammation in the body. And then the second R is restoring the microbiome. The third R is repairing the gut lining. The fourth R is re-optimizing your micronutrient status. And then the fifth R is rebounding your adrenals. And the sixth R is rebalancing your neurotransmitters. And so all of those can be equally important starting points. I wrote the book starting with inflammation because I do feel foundationally that that's one of the biggest influencers. And, then kind of going through the microbiome, which is our production house for our neurotransmitters, into leaky gut, because we know that when larger particles penetrate the blood-brain barrier, that can interfere with the way that our neurotransmitters are able to communicate or dock. Moving into the micronutrients, which are the building blocks to actually make the neurotransmitters out of, and then the glands of focus, the adrenals, and the neurotransmitters. So some people will enter in a stage of neurotransmitter rebalance, and those are the people that are probably more diagnostically associated with like bipolar or mania and really need a leg up before they can work that foundational mechanism in the body. But that's actually less than, generally speaking, of my clinical experience, 10% of patients that are dealing with anxiety. Often we will enter at a different point. And so in my book, what I do is I have a chapter quiz with each of these R's so that you can determine if you, for instance, are dealing with dermatological flares. Let's say that you have rashing or patching going on, and you're dealing with distension and bloating, and the bloating tends to precipitate throughout the day, getting more severe, like more of a fermentation type bloat, and we're dealing with bowel irregularity, then I would likely attribute, and you've had antibiotics in the past, then likely that's going to be someone that needs to work with their microbiome to enter this program. And then there's going to be someone else who may be a mom who just carried a child for 9 months and breastfed for a year plus, and they're going to want to start with repleting their micronutrient status as the first entry point because they're dealing with this demand of building and growing a child. And then there's someone maybe that just dealt with hurricane, and they're going to need to start with that rebounding their adrenals because they were just running on cortisol for a period of time. Or my high interval athletes, high interval training athletes, high intensity, or professional athletes, they might need to start at the adrenal. So everyone, based on their story and where they arrive at and some of the symptoms beyond just the stress and mental health, is going to help us to determine where they need to start strategically. All of the R's are very important, but as far as supplementation support and advanced lab testing, that's where you probably dig deeper into that one rabbit hole and then kind of build off from there.
Yeah. And I feel like as you, like with the R's, as you do one R, maybe the next R gets a little bit easier, especially like you said, it starts with inflammation. Once you take out those inflammatory foods, that obviously just moves you kind of to like healing your gut and all that stuff. So I feel like as you check off each R, it probably does get a little bit easier. And probably the first one's the most hardest to tackle, I'm sure.
Yes, yes.
And so diving into inflammatory foods and the connection that it has with anxiety and mood, which ones are the top ones to avoid?
So I pull out dairy, and I was sad to do that because I'm from Wisconsin. And so I feel like it's like, my roots. But I had to pull out dairy because the role of casein. And casein is one of the primary proteins. There's casein and whey. And casein does interfere with something called our casomorphin compounds in the brain. So it does have opioid-like tendencies. And there is a lot of compelling research on that casein protein and brain and mood stability. So that's one that I do pull out for the 12 weeks. I do a 12-week removal of these 5 inflammatory foods. So dairy in all forms. And at
people are addicted to cheese.
Yeah, for sure. And cheese is a very concentrated form. So at week 7 of the 12 weeks out, I do allow testing of ghee, which is casein and lactose free, and then working into potentially testing like a grass-fed whey if needed. So dairy, soy, corn, wheat, and sugar. And so when we're looking at the soy and the corn, one of the big influencing concerns is GMOs and the chemicals that are also used with the Roundup Ready genetically modified plants, which have higher tolerance to neurotoxins, essentially. And these types of sprays and the glyphosate can really drive neurological distress. It can definitely interfere with our endocrine and hormone system, as well as our neurological function and our neurotransmitter function. So that was an easy. And then the fact that both soy and corn are also high omega-6 in their nature, they're going to have a higher inflammatory ratio. And so those were pulled out for that reason. And then wheat, the big connection there is, So wheat and gluten was looking at the gliadin and its interference with zonulin. So we're looking at interference with gut junction and an actual mechanical driver of leaky gut. So, regardless of us having a sensitivity to gluten, removing gluten in all forms for 12 weeks would still be a therapeutic intervention, because regardless, we're going to have that zonulin impact. And we want to make sure that we aren't creating a dislodge of the junctions in the gut if we're looking at removing inflammation. So that was the kind of big mechanism I was focusing on there. And then gluteomorphin, very comparable to that casein that I mentioned. There's another protein in wheat that plays a role on the opioid receptors in the brain. So that can create this addictive tendency. And we know the short dwarf wheat, which hit the market, this was funded by researchers in World War II when we weren't fat enough to make draft weight in the Army. It was an obesogenic crop, and there's documentation of it. And this is what hit the grocery stores in the 90s. And it paired with the recommendations to eat more fiber. And so we all started going super, super high gluten intake with both the hybridized short dwarf wheat and then the idea of getting more fiber in our foods. And I think that definitely led to a huge increase in the last 20 years of autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
So gluten is pulled up for that reason, and many. And then the last one being sugar. My recognition there is beyond sugar as being somewhat inflammatory and imbalancing to our gut. We're actually looking to remove also excessive carbohydrates, and that's where I start to present the concept of a ketogenic diet. And this is a very low carbohydrate diet. And the mechanisms of ketones in the brain have fantastic promise to mood stability and neurological health. In fact, the ketogenic diet was initiated really in the 1940s for a treatment adjuvant to epilepsy. So if you think of the mechanism of a seizure and being this excitatory neurological central nervous system output, that same anxiety, stress, worry is micro levels of that. And so if these ketone bodies can cross the blood-brain barrier and work with our GABA receptors and reduce that excitatory influence of seizure, they can also have very promising grounding effects from the central nervous system into the enteric nervous system of our gut to help with feeling very grounded and mellow in the body. And then we're also taking out the double-edged sword of refined carbohydrates, creating blood sugar spikes and drops, which can create, as we know, a lot of trends with research with ADHD, mood instability, behavior concerns, and energy irregularity for sure, which can spar with mood when we get hangry and stuff like that.
Yes. I'm glad in your book you explained a little bit more into wheat than just gluten, because I know I kind of hate saying just gluten-free because there are so many other proteins that are problematic. So I'm glad that you did all those and you explained them very well.
Thank you.
So people can actually understand like why wheat isn't ideal. And I would say wheat is honestly one of the foods that I just kind of never recommend reintroducing. I'm down for like a little bit of raw grass-fed cheese and things if you can handle it. But wheat, I just almost never recommend. It's a very, very rare indulgence if we do have it, but it's never just in our daily life anymore.
Sure.
So give us some mood stabilizing tips. I know you kind of mentioned keto and how that works. What are some other ones, or some foods too? Some of your favorite mood stabilizing foods?
Sure. So I focus a lot on getting ample protein because protein is broken down into amino acids, and amino acids are our building blocks for our neurotransmitters. Protein also registers to be very satiating and grounding for the body and can be very supportive for our immunological system, and generally speaking tends to be one of the least inflammatory compounds, because when we talk about vegetables, which are phenomenal, vegetables tend to come with anti-nutrients of varied forms, like lectins and phytates and things like that. So protein is a huge emphasis of my book. I actually give a protein kind of calculating equation. I believe that's in the neurotransmitter chapter. And
I haven't got there yet.
Okay. So, I have this kind of like minimum need, and we talk about the different precursors. So we think of often tryptophan as the most popular one as the precursor to serotonin. And that's going to be in pumpkin seeds and in turkey. And that's kind of that like Thanksgiving. Oh, everyone like falls asleep and gets mellow after eating. I think it's also because people overeat, but they're in a food coma. But,
yeah.
But
a very good one.
Yes, but tryptophan nonetheless does help with serotonin production. And then, for instance, tyrosine is another amino acid that drives our dopamine production. And then dopamine converts into norepinephrine and epinephrine and that feel-good adrenaline. And then B vitamins also are a huge component of mood-stabilizing nutrients. So looking at our foliage, like 2 to 3 cups of leafy greens a day, this is going to be a great form of folic acid, and that's in a bioavailable form, as is liver, actually an even more potent form of folate. And that's a really great methylator for the body, which can help with detox and building pathways. And all of our B vitamins, including B6, B12, B9, which is folate, and biotin, all of them play a big role as basically cofactors or activators of our amino acids, turning them into neurotransmitters. So getting variety of protein, variety of B-rich foods is kind of a big foundation. And then there's also minerals that play a role as mood stabilizers as well.
Cool. And I know that you're pretty paleo too. And so could you quickly explain a little bit of the difference between amino acids in plants and amino acids in animals?
Yeah, so nutrients in general are going to be more bioavailable, especially when we look at actually like minerals in a animal form versus a vegetarian form. And so when we're looking at, for instance, like iron is one of the easiest ones. And I was vegan, so I used to kind of say like, oh, you can get all of your iron from spinach. You can get all of your B12 from spirulina, and all of these things that we hear, or the gut microbiomes make this. And there's true to some state, but when you look at actually the amount of vegetarian food to meet your mineral needs, it takes a lot of volume, which can be very distressing to the GI tract, and B, it's not in a bioavailable form. So for instance, iron comes in ferrous and ferric forms. We need the ferrous form. So in the vegetarian forms, it's in ferric. We need to add acid to activate that from a +3 to a +2 charge. So you're going to need to add, which is intuitive, to add acid like salad dressing to your leafy greens. That helps. But then even beyond that ferric-ferrous chemical structure, there's also heme versus non-heme iron, and that still is non-heme iron. And the non-heme iron, only to a significantly lower percent, actually builds red blood cells and has the same functional ability to carry blood oxygenation to the brain and so many of these necessary influences of the body. And then we get amino acids like glycine and proline and some of these things that you just can't even get in a vegetarian form from foods like collagen and bone broth and fattier cuts of protein. And I think that's one of the biggest things to honor and acknowledge with a more ancestral approach to eating is this snout to tail philosophy. Because if we just eat meat from muscle fibers, we aren't going to be getting optimal nutrition either. So it's not just about eating animal. It's about honoring and eating a whole animal and balancing that in a whole foods diet.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I know I love hot dogs, grass-fed hot dogs, good quality ones. But I think it's funny when people are like, you don't know what's in hot dog. It could be like, any organ, or I'm like, that's a good thing. Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Eat it.
That's true. Totally.
It's super easy to eat a steak and a chicken breast and all these things, but it's a little bit harder, even for me, like liver, it's a mental thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, and it's very metallic tasting. I have to kind of like mantra myself through it. Like, this is medicinal. This is medicinal.
For you.
Yeah.
Now eat it. Cool.
Sure.
So I know your book is I'm not even done with it yet. And it's so full of good knowledge and things that people can really take and start implementing in their life too. So when does it come out and where is it going to be? Where can you get it?
So it should come out any day now. It went to print August 7th. So time is telling, but literally it should be any day now. I was told the 17th. I think today's the 15th, so who knows? We're getting there. Okay, we'll see. It could be the 27th, who knows, but it should be for sure by the end of August.
Cool.
And you can still pre-order. You can pre-order on Amazon and you can pre-order at Barnes & Noble. And I will be doing, for the Austin audience, I will be doing a book signing at the Picnic Trailer on Lamar on September 29th, which is a Saturday. So if you're in the Austin area, I'll be doing a little lecture and book signing, and you can buy it direct from me there, which would be awesome. Cool. I'd love to meet people and share the message.
Well, I'm sure I'll be there because I would love to take any excuse.
Fantastic, right?
That's a good one.
Butter bones on a Saturday morning and all good things.
Love it. And then where can we find you?
So everything is under Allie Miller RD. So on Instagram and Facebook, it's at Allie Miller RD, which is just ALIMILLER RD. And then my website is alliemillerrd.com. And so I have a virtual food as medicine ketosis class as well, if that's something that you've been hearing about in the buzz and you don't want to go into that world of non-caloric sweeteners and diet foods or just eating bacon and you want to use food as medicine, but see how you feel by making ketones. That's a great entry point. And then I have a bunch of ebooks and then my clinic is virtual as well.
Awesome. Well, all that stuff will be in the show notes. So I'm sure people will reach out to you if they want to. And I'll also put the links to pre-order your book.
Great.
So I think Amazon will probably be the most popular. I'll just use
it. And you can get it on my website too, but you can't pre-order on my website. So that'll for archive listening.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's so fun.